Welcome back to the channel. This will be the best free hit team for Gameweek 13. I've got both the free hit and wildcard available, and I'll be choosing between those two boosters to use for the upcoming deadline. That'll be talked about in my team selection podcast and on Saturday's deadline stream, which will be slightly later than usual at 1:30 p.m. in the UK. And there's also going to be a best wildcard squad video coming up very soon. The same goes for predicted lineups if this video gets to over 150 likes, and let's close in on new goals like 38k on YouTube. So subscribe, hit the notification bell and all that good stuff, and let's grow all my social media platforms. Join my Discord server, the FPL and FPL Challenge Leagues, and check out my Spotify, leave a 5-star review. And if you want even more updates on my content, and the same goes for FPL and UCL Fantasy, then follow me on Twitter, Instagram and Blue Sky. But without further ado, let's jump straight into it. My squad value is 100.5 million, and I've also got 0.8 in the bank, and I'll be building this 15-man squad with that sort of value, but it is different to purchase prices, as I always say. And with the free hit, you build a team specifically for one game week, then your team resets to how it was before you activate the chip. You can't make transfers, activate the free hit, and have those transfers go through. They will only form part of your free hit squad, and you will still be affected by price changes to the players you had before activating the free hit chip, but not those you bring in with that booster. And with the wildcard, it is different because that enforces permanent changes to your squad. That is more of a long-term tool, and that's why it's so important to differentiate between both of them and the best time to use every single booster in the game. That's all covered in my chip strategy guide, and be sure to become a patron or channel member if you want to support the channel even further and gain early access to my videos amongst many other perks. But I'm going to start off with the two goalkeepers and work my way up through every single position. Aston Villa are second for the clean sheet odds, only behind Man City. I'll cover them in the best wildcard squad video and the deadline stream on Saturday, but Aston Villa will have a tricky test potentially against Wolves because that is a derby and there could be a lot of feistiness to that fixture. But Aston Villa have a solid home record against Wolves over the years, a few 2-0s in there, 3-1 victories, but ultimately you want that clean sheet to invest in an Emi Martinez or one of their defenders. I think Matty Cash would be the best of the bunch. Ezri Konsa is nailed on, and you'll start virtually most matches in the Premier League, either as a centre-half or as a right-back when needed. And when you look at the other options like Luca Dean, he didn't even get 60-plus minutes against Leeds in that 2-1 victory. So I would either go for Emi Martinez or Matty Cash to cover Villa defensively, and they would be one of the teams I back for a clean sheet this week. So that's why Emi Martinez does make it in here. He is 7th for FPL points scored amongst goalkeepers with 43, and just behind him is Martin Dubravka. He's in 11th place with 37 points for the season. He is just going to be there to sit on your bench and be a facilitator and enabler just in case something goes wrong and Emi Martinez misses out. You've got Dubravka away to Brentford, but I don't back Burnley for a clean sheet, and ultimately you don't need to spend too much money on your bench, particularly with your second goalkeeper. So keep it simple. I think it's quite obvious now in all these wildcard and free hit videos that Dubravka would be the backup in most of these situations. And one of my favorite goalkeepers for Gameweek 13 is Emi Martinez. I also like Donnarumma, who was benched in the Champions League, much to my dismay, on Delimila's chip in UCL Fantasy, and it was Trafford starting that game instead. So Man City made 10 changes in that 2-0 loss against Bayer Leverkusen, and they should go really strong against Leeds this weekend. So that's why you could also go for Donnarumma to cover Man City defensively, but I've got a different plan in action, and I'm going to go for Emi Martinez in goal and one Man City defender to kick things off. Nico O'Reilly is one of the most informed defenders in the country, and he might even have a stake as the left back for England in the World Cup next year. Facing Leeds at home next, Man City are top of the clean sheet odds with a 54% probability of keeping a clean sheet. You've also got Gvardiol, and all these players were rested in that 2-0 loss against Bayer Leverkusen, but I think Nico O'Reilly might be the most exciting. He's got the assist potential, and Gvardiol is playing as a centre-half nowadays. That has been the case since last season, where we saw Nico O'Reilly slowly but surely being embedded into that team and becoming the main left-back for Manchester City. So he does make it in here, and the same goes for a premium who hasn't really been at it in the last couple of weeks, just like his team. But Virgil van Dijk has been excellent in UCL Fantasy with 2 Player of the Match awards, and this video is recorded before their game against PSV Eindhoven, so we'll see how they get on. But I think Van Dijk is still capable of some clean sheets mixed with bonus points, defensive contributions, which he's still doing very well, and the odd goal here and there. Against Man City, he scored, and I think that goal was wrongfully disallowed. But I think Van Dijk against West Ham, and Liverpool, by the way, have a great record against the Hammers. They could still bounce back, but it has been awful from them over the last 11 matches with 8 losses in that time frame across all competitions. But I still think Liverpool have the ability within their squad to find solutions, and once they can get the balance right, they will get several victories and maybe go on a run. But I think the Premier League title is now out of reach for them. You can't lose 6 games in the Premier League alone by the time we get to November. That is just far too many. And I think Virgil van Dijk is still one of the best defenders for this week. But looking forwards, I think you would rather prioritise Arsenal defenders like Jurriën Timber, and Gabriel before his injury was the standout defender in general. There's also Daniel Munoz and his Crystal Palace options like Tyrick Mitchell, although I'd rank him even lower than Lacroix, Richards and Gay, who would be right up with Daniel Munoz in the defender chart. So Van Dijk is really a punt for the next 3 game weeks, but beyond that, you look at the fixtures and they're very solid for Liverpool up until the turn of the year, but you need to see more consistency from them, and they're conceding so many chances and sloppy goals, particularly from set pieces. But the next option is going to be quite left field, and it's because they have such a plum fixture on paper. I'm going for Coyote, who is known for his long throws and also some decent play as a wing back. But Brentford are playing a back 4 nowadays. They found that sort of winning formula. They're getting more results consistently with that 4-2-3-1 formation. And that is good news for Dango Ouattara, because if Brentford were to shift to a back 5 again, then Dango Ouattara is the most likely to drop out. But in this defensive line, you might want more defensive contributions from the likes of Vandenberg and Collins. But I think Coyote offers more threat from open play when it comes to the assists. But this is something I'm open to changing, because DEFCON is so important this season and fullbacks have been kind of sidelined because of this new system. But I think Coyote is still worth the investment and consideration. He has a massive differential and he's got 35 points so far this season. He only costs 4.5 million, and you could definitely pick much worse for Game Week 13. But the other 2 defenders will primarily sit on the bench, and I'll talk about the starting 11 later on using the website FPL.team. But Hartman would basically be a 3.9 million option. I think he's 4 million at this point. And you've got these other Burnley defenders like Esteve. You might even want to go for him over Hartman. So if you need that extra money, just go for the cheaper option. But he's just going to be on your bench, and I wouldn't really consider him as a starter. But you might want a Spurs defender. Van der Ven would be the standout. Christian Romero is suspended after picking up his 5th yellow card of the season in that 4-1 loss against Arsenal. And I would expect Pedro Porro to start, but that also depends on Spurs' lineup against Paris Saint-Germain on Wednesday night. But Danso will start in Game Week 13, and he only costs 4.3 million. So whether you want to start him or have him first on your bench, I think Danso is a great pick on the free hit this week from a budget perspective. And against Fulham, Spurs could keep a clean sheet and also bounce back from their recent losses. And at home, they are 19th in the Premier League table. In away matches, they are now 3rd in the Premier League table, but they're so inconsistent under Thomas Frank when it comes to creativity. They have improved in terms of set pieces and defensively, but I think some Spurs fans are frustrated with their style of play and also the performances in some of the big games against Chelsea and Arsenal. But I would back them to get a victory against Fulham, and a clean sheet is possible. There are 2 Man City midfielders that I've got my eye on this week in Jeremy Doku and Phil Foden. You could even extend this to Ryan Cherki, whose minutes are even less secure, and all of them were essentially rested against Bayer Leverkusen, and the likes of Foden and Haaland only made short cameos in that 2-0 loss. But I think Doku's the most informed midfielder from Man City, and even against Newcastle, he was one of their better players, and him being subbed off was probably a mistake on Pep Guardiola's behalf. But Doku is someone I don't mind on a free hit. I just don't trust him long term to get the goals and assists on a consistent basis to really justify himself in your FPL setups. And he's only got 1 goal this season, which came against Liverpool, so you're not going to get too many goals from him. But in some of these home games against Man United, Burnley and Liverpool, he's produced some massive returns at the Etihad, and he could do the same against Leeds this weekend. And I would not be surprised if it was an absolute mauling and Man City get a 3 or 4-0 victory. It might even be even more than that. Mohamed Salah is up next, and I completely understand if you don't want to go for him. And if you try to go for this sort of structure of him and Haaland simultaneously, you have to make sacrifices with the rest of your squad. That's something I don't necessarily mind on a free hit, but just like with the Doku pick, I think longer term I would have a lot of questions about that, especially considering Salah's form. He has been way off it this season. You want a big performance from him against PSV Eindhoven to really have more belief in this pick, but I think Salah doesn't justify that 14.2 million price tag. There's a reason why a lot of people have sold him over the last couple of months, and I started this campaign with him, and he got a few returns here and there, but you knew something wasn't quite right. And once Liverpool stopped winning and they started really going down the Premier League table, Salah hasn't been able to really help them out and salvage some points from them, and he's not getting returns at all in a lot of these matches. So Salah's been a big disappointment this season, but he boasts a great record against West Ham. I still think the Hammers have a clear weakness on the right-hand side, which Salah could exploit, and ultimately the Hammers are not solid defensively. So this could be a nice time to invest in Salah as a one-week punt and then forget about him for quite a while. But Kevin Schade does make it into this team. You might also want to consider Danga Ouattara, and Damsgaard could be a decent differential against Burnley, but a triple up in Brentford is certainly on the cards. Instead of Coyote, as I mentioned before, you might even want to go for Kelleher between the sticks, but I do like the structure of this 15-man squad, and I prefer Emi Martinez in goal. And Kevin Schade is probably the most likely to score goals besides Igor Thiago, who is the clear talisman for Brentford. He is the one almost must-have asset that the Bees have to offer, and Kevin Schade would probably be second in my overall list. But there are 2 spots left. I know Kudus could be an option for some people, and you might also want to consider a few other Spurs midfielders like Xavi Simons, who could start as well in Gameweek 13, but I would prioritise Aston Villa. Buendia is in great form, but I would go for Morgan Rogers, who scored a brace against Leeds United. One was from a free kick, and the other was a very clever finish at the near post, and he also showed a bit of form a few weeks before that, and I think that was around October, where he got a goal against Tottenham Hotspur and got a few assists here and there. So you're hoping for more consistency from Morgan Rogers, who now costs 6.9 million in FPL with 50 points for the season. He has been the best Aston Villa asset overall, and Ollie Watkins has been such a massive disappointment up front, so I probably wouldn't go for him, but I think Watkins, a bit like Salah, is one of those players who has a high ceiling in a week like this, considering their fixture, and you could invest in that sort of player as a one-week punt and then drop them for the rest of the season. But the last midfielder is entirely based on your budget. You might have enough to go for Granit Xhaka, so you could certainly go for him, but I'm just investing in a very cheap midfielder who's going to sit on your bench in Josh King. He costs 4.5 million with 22 points. He had a goal wrongfully disallowed against Chelsea earlier in the season, but he hasn't really shown too much apart from that. I know he's got potential and he's only going to get better, but when it comes to the goal contributions, he has been very lackluster. I thought he would have got a few goal contributions by this stage of the season, but he's just going to sit on your bench and you don't need to think about starting him over Rodgers, Schade, Salah, or Jeremy Doku. But let's now go to the free forwards, and all of them would be in the starting 11. But of course, you can change things a little bit and go to a front 2, and that would allow you to have that 5th midfielder to invest in over Josh King. Over the past 3 matches in FPL and UCL Fantasy, Erling Haaland has been very disappointing with 4 points against Liverpool after scoring and also missing a penalty in that 3-0 win. He also blanked against Newcastle and delivered 2 points, and in UCL Fantasy, he came off the bench and played 25 minutes against Bayer Leverkusen, so he has been very frustrating in both fantasy formats, but against Leeds United, he is still the best triple captaincy option for the first half of the season. And I know you will also have chances against Sunderland in Gameweek 15 or West Ham a little bit later, and I would look at that West Ham fixture as a great sort of alternative week to use the triple captaincy, especially if you have the wildcard or free hit boosters, because they could be used in Gameweek 13 as well. And it's about prioritizing these boosters and using them in the correct sequence. That will ultimately be team dependent. Check out my chip strategy guide and you'll see all my different ideas. I've also discussed this in some of my recent deadline streams, but against Leeds United, I think Man City will win big and Erling Haaland could score a brace or a hat-trick, and I think he's the best captaincy option as a result. The second forward would be Igor Thiago. If you want to go for something a little bit different per se, I think captaining Igor Thiago could be the play, especially if you back Leeds United to cause an upset or for Man City to struggle a little bit more than others would think. But I don't have that opinion, to be honest, and I still think Haaland is the clear standout when it comes to the armband. But Igor Thiago is second, and he's probably clear of the rest of the pack, but that also includes Danny Welbeck, who is in form, and currently he sits 4th in terms of points scored amongst forwards. Joao Pedro is still 3rd, but I think these 3 forwards are amongst the very best in FPL right now. If I was wildcarding though, I think Mateta is a more solid option compared to Welbeck, but I think both of them offer great value, and we can't really dispute what Welbeck is doing for Brighton at this moment in time. They also have promising fixtures, and he can score against the biggest and best teams in the country. So I think all of them could also be worthwhile on the wild card. So that completes the 15-man squad, but let me show you the captaincy, the starting 11 and bench order whilst discussing alternatives in every single position. Between the sticks, I would go for Emi Martinez, and Dubravka is the backup with a defensive line of Van Dijk, Coyote, and O'Reilly. Salah, Rodgers, Schade and Doku complete the midfield with Welbeck, Thiago and Haaland up front. On the bench, there's Dubravka, Danso, King and Hartman. And a few things you could consider, especially if you are tight with budget, is going for Esteve over Hartman. That saves you 0.1 million in the process. And if you have enough money, you could even upgrade King to Granit Xhaka, but it's all team dependent and you don't really need to bolster your bench as well. I think having one good option on your bench is important because you might need it to come on for one of those players missing out in your starting 11, but you don't need to stack it up because with the free hit, you want to invest the majority of your funds into the starting 11. That could be a bit different with the wildcard though, especially going into the Christmas period where you're going to have so many games, rotation's going to be a thing, injuries, suspensions can also be a huge factor. So I think having a lot of squad depth is very important on the wildcard, but not necessarily on the free hit. So Xhaka over King could be an upgrade. Then I've got 0 million in the bank. But of course, in goal, I talked about Kelleher and Donnarumma as alternatives. I think in isolation, Donnarumma is the very best, but I also want to cover Man City defensively with Nico O'Reilly. And then you've got plenty of midfielders like Cherki, Foden and Doku with Erling Haaland up front. And in terms of a few other changes we could make, I think the main one is to downgrade Welbeck to a cheap striker. So that could be Krupi Jr. or Mark Guiu, and then using those extra funds, 2.4 million, to then upgrade Xhaka to a different midfielder. And at 7.6 million and below, you would just be shy of Eze, or at least you would be in my situation with the funds I've got, but then you could look at something a little bit different. I know some people might even consider Enzo Fernandez, but against the Arsenal defence, I'd still not be too keen on that. And Ismail Assar or a Crystal Palace player is still a viable choice. Daniel Munoz in that defensive line would still be right up there this week. Jean-Philippe Mateta as well. So there are different ways of covering this sort of free hit and maybe going for a 3-5-2 formation or going for a back four. So you don't have to be restricted to just this. And another player I mentioned is actually Kudus against Fulham, but Spurs have been so inconsistent in home matches and I think they struggle for creativity at times, but Kudus is the main driving force in their attack. So let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. How would you structure this free hit squad? Mark Guiu will be last on the bench if you decide to go for this 3-5-2, but there are different ways of playing it this week. I think the main sort of candidates would be Haaland, Thiago. I think Salah would still be right up there, even with the captaincy, but I wouldn't go for him over Erling Haaland personally. I think a secondary City attacker is also mandatory almost on this free hit, especially with their rest in midweek against Bayer Leverkusen. So you should expect the likes of Foden and Doku to start in that game. And if you have enough money, you could also stretch to Phil Foden from Jeremy Doku. And with my squad value and the value I've got tied up in all these players, to make that possible, downgrading Schade to Dango Ouattara could also make this work, but just bear in mind that if Brentford switch to a back five, Dango is the most likely to drop out of that starting 11. We've seen that on multiple occasions this season, and you might even want to go for Minter, who could also replace Kudus in this setup. And if you still want Kevin Schade still, you can actually go for him alongside Minter, but that means no Kudus in this 15-man squad. And some of you might also not want Liverpool defenders like Virgil van Dijk. I completely understand that, but I still think he has a lot of avenues to points, and one big return is imminent in my opinion. But Liverpool need to solidify themselves at the back and cut out the threat from transitions, and also in terms of set pieces, they're defending them so poorly. Van Dijk is one of the few who does his job most of the time there, and he offers a lot of threat on the other side of the pitch. In both boxes, Van Dijk is very important, but the likes of Konate have had an awful season. But I want to see your thoughts in terms of the best players in every single position. Would you go for Matty Cash and maybe a different goalkeeper over Emi Martinez? And instead of Coyote, if you really want to target DEFCON, I think Vandenberg might be the very best, but he has dropped off a little bit when it comes to defensive contributions. He had a great start to the season and has slowly but surely tailed away a little bit. So I think with the free hit, I don't think we have too many options, to be honest, but we do have a few alternatives within these teams, like with these Brentford defenders, and with Brighton, do you go for Minter or Welbeck? maybe even both of them. And some people might even consider a Nottingham Forest player. Of course, they beat Brighton 7-0 last season, but I don't expect that sort of scoreline this time round. And then there's Sharda versus Dango Ouattara, Doku versus Foden. Maybe you want to go for both of them simultaneously and a triple Man City attack. But my preference is having 2 attackers and 1 defender or Donnarumma in goal. That's yet another decision to make on the free hit, but the likes of Thiago, Haaland and potentially Salah are locked in for this free hit squad. And I also like an Aston Villa attacker like Morgan Rogers. Ollie Watkins could come good this week, but he has been so disappointing this season. Even the underlying numbers are terrible. He's not having enough shots, particularly in clear-cut situations. Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below and provide your opinions and feelings on the best assets in every single position, not just for this week alone on the free hit, but also on the wild card for the long term. There will be a wildcard squad video coming up, so keep your eyes peeled for that. You can see the top 10 captains in this podcast, with Mateta in 10th, facing Man United at home. Danny Welbeck is 9th, facing Nottingham Forest away. I've put Bukayo Saka in here against Chelsea away, but I think with these Arsenal and Chelsea players, it's quite difficult to call in terms of who's going to make the difference in that London derby. Ollie Watkins is 7th, facing Wolves at home, and I'll be honest with you, it is a bit of a struggle to find some of these names to really have a lot of confidence in for the top 10. But Doku is 6th. I think he could have a very high ceiling against Leeds. Rodgers does make the top 5, and Foden is 4th. I think he could do really well in that home fixture, while Salah is in the podium against West Ham away, but that's because of the quality of player we've seen over the years. This season, it has been a different story. Igor Thiago is 2nd. There's a massive gap between him and the rest of the pack, and Erling Haaland is undisputably number 1 this week. There were certainly arguments to go against him for the captaincy against Liverpool and Newcastle, but I don't really have that this week when he's facing Leeds at home. He is arguably the best triple captaincy option left for the first half of the season. If you've got that booster and nothing else remaining, I would play it right now, but West Ham at home in a couple of weeks' time also appeals to a certain extent. Thank you very much for watching this video and listening to this podcast. If you enjoyed it or found it insightful, then like this video, subscribe to my channel, and also hit that notification bell so you're always up to date on my content for both FPL and UCL Fantasy, which I'll cover until the end of the season. Let's get this video to over 150 likes and closing on new goals like 38k on YouTube. Follow me on X, Instagram and Blue Sky, Dylan RCM, and check all the links in the description for my Patreon and the championships, fair likes to my videos, proud to add to comments, amongst many other perks. My Discord server, the FPL League and Spotify can also be found in the description. I'll see you on Saturday for the next deadline stream, and keep your eyes peeled for the best wildcard squad and my team selection.